Do you believe in magic? Many people do. So prepare to be astounded and amazed. These are the words with which most Americans are familiar. The words of a stage illusionist engaged in the performance of magic before an audience. Or, if you prefer, a magician engaged in magic. It all depends on one's point of view, you see. And during pandemics, which according to the Data Institute at the University of California, San Francisco, California, are times that have been historically associated with feelings of fear, feelings of confusion, and feelings of despair. Not very logical. At least for those engaged in the profession of what, shall we say, are matters of internal security. These emotional responses, practically arising from an almost instinctual reflex for protection, may provide a considerable advantage for purposes of compliance and control. Imagine yourself isolated and in interrogation. And so, from the outset, the viewer should be aware that if you, like most Americans who believe in New Age beliefs, including belief in reincarnation, astrology, psychics, and the presence of spiritual energy in physical objects like mountains or trees, vis-a-vis an invisible enemy, even one lacking any sentient capacity at all. In a global public health crisis, you would be placed at an unfavorable disadvantage because with regard to its purpose for life, it is far more knowledgeable than you, with a mission to acquire you as a host and replicate itself, and nothing more, requiring thought. Do you believe in magic? At the end of March 2020, according to Pew Research Center, these statistics may well represent your feelings about a pandemic. About 9 in 10 U.S. adults, 91%, said that given the current situation, they would feel uncomfortable attending a crowded park. And today, still many people remain quite apprehensive about large social gatherings. In March 2020, roughly 3/4, 77%, would not want to eat out at a restaurant. And even in New York City, with all of its cosmopolitan ways, and in the nation's capital, many eating establishments continue to require proof of vaccination or recent COVID-19 negative test results. In March 2020, in the midst of a presidential election year, about 2/3, 66%, said they wouldn't feel comfortable going to a polling place to vote. However, at that very same time, Virginia Democrats broke records during the Super Tuesday presidential primaries. And in a record-breaking voter turnout election year that found as many as 4.2 million Virginians voting, only less than 1 million decided to opt for the extra layer of protection by casting their ballot by mail, while 3/4 decided to take the risk of infection and perhaps death by voting absentee but in person at a traditional voting place, afforded extra convenient time. So apparently in the Commonwealth of Virginia, while most voters suffered adverse effects arising from closed businesses, schools, and churches, disruption in holiday and travel plans, when it came to doing their duty to vote, just as to get vaccinated, somehow they summoned the courage to take a risk. And by at least serendipity and dumb luck, no resulting spikes in infections, hospitalizations, and fatalities arose. A report, which is at least to a scientist quite an anomalous occurrence. Propitious, unless we also assume a natural immunity arising from the exercise of your franchise privilege. Similarly, in March 2020, a smaller but still substantial share expressed discomfort even when going to the grocery store, 42%, or visiting with a close friend or family member in their home, 38%, which is, at least anecdotally, looking back, might be explained by the necessity for subsistence connected to a visit to a grocery store, and a man's nature of seeking those subsistence needs, as in the Maslow hierarchy, just as man's nature of being social for a willingness to take risks when it came to being close with others within your familiar relations might be natural. But do you believe in magic? Some may be aware that even before a public health crisis, even though as many as 65% of Americans had identified with some faith affiliation, belief without evidence, some say, after a decade that had experienced a 12 percentage point decline in the Commonwealth of Virginia, the only former state of the Confederacy to vote for Hillary Clinton in 2016, that figure of faith affiliation was around only 45%, and in the county of Arlington, as low as 32%. And before the beginning of the pandemic, across the nation, as many as 23% of Americans had identified themselves as nuns, to include atheists, agnostics, and persons who preferred not to identify with any faith beliefs at all. A religious category for statistical purposes which had even exceeded the proportion of Americans who had identified themselves as Roman Catholic, the largest faith denomination in America. And after 2 years of pandemic crisis, the percentage of nuns actually increased across the country by 6 points to 29%, and probably proportionally larger in Virginia, at least, while leaders in the faith community had volunteered to declare themselves non-essential. And it can only be said without casting any judgment that the situation speaks for itself. Do the math. Or do you believe in magic? Yet, at least those in the faith community who saw a glimmer of hope at the beginning of the public health crisis may have been found sleeping in the faith, and may have awoken surprised after coming out from the wilderness of a pandemic, waiting for the flocks of the faithful to return, because the door was open for them to come. And in March 2020, with reports of record-breaking Bible sales, many in the faith community, while Easter and Passover services were permitted to retreat until after the pandemic, there were sounds of exultation that, according to Pew Research Center, more than half of all U.S. adults, 55%, said they have prayed for an end to the spread of the coronavirus. Large majorities of Americans who prayed daily, 86%, and of U.S. Christians, 73%, had taken to prayer during the outbreak. But some have who say they seldom or never pray, and people who said they do not belong to any religion, 15% and 24% respectively. How, then, one might ask, were so many people praying, while half as many as had departed the church in the prior decade joined the ranks of the nuns with no belief in just 2 years? While by May 2020, 1 in 5 churches, having failed to make their provision for a hereafter pandemic, have permanently closed their doors. Did not the Lord provide? Or in Darwinian natural selection, did the strong survive while the weak perished? Studies by the American Bible Society have suggested that failure to engage in those devotional practices in persons with other persons where reading of the Bible was enforced found the lowest reading of the Bible scriptures during the pandemic, even though record sales were made for that book. By March 2020, as news stories regarding super spreader events in Skagit County in Washington, and the deaths of as many as 30 Pentecostal bishops were widely reported. By Pew Research Center, it was found that among U.S. adults who said in an earlier survey they attend religious services at least once or twice per month, most, 59%, then said they had scaled back their attendance because of the coronavirus. In many cases, presumably because churches and other houses of worship have canceled services. Yet a similar share, 57%, reported having watched religious services online or on TV instead of attending in person. Together, 4 in 10 regular worshipers appeared to have replaced in-person attendance with virtual worship, saying that they have been attending less often but watching online instead. Only 4 in 10, 40%. While others decided to wait for the end of the pandemic, or for the arrival of life-saving vaccines, or on the power of prayer, relying on the efforts of others to deliver them, while any work at evangelism ceased. Even mission work. While certainly vaccine sales and mask sales continued, and as may be reasonably expected, the results did not defy probability of some supernatural occurrence, except perhaps in the record-breaking turnout for the vote. While what happened to the church could be reasonably anticipated from the beginning, that they would lose their market share. Or do you believe in magic? In fact, recent reports suggest that even dating back to 2006, scientists had determined that lockdowns had no effect at all on mortality in pandemics. Yet during pandemic, many feared going to church because of their fear that they might die by going to church. Or do you believe in magic? According to Live Science in October 2011, 71% of Americans believe that they had a paranormal experience, and 55% of Americans believe in psychic healing beyond faith healing, but including New Age treatments like Reiki and acupuncture. As many as 41% of Americans who voted for the science believed in extrasensory perception, ESP. Believe it or not, there are actually masters of magic, and there are also your common variety magicians who just perform magic. And the difference between the two is that the magicians know how to perform the trick, and perhaps even well, while the masters know why it works and can do it better. And even though Dr. Rochelle Walensky, a medical doctor, remarking about a virus that apparently isn't stupid and has done some magic on its own, had said that it is hard, very hard to predict human behavior. At least any good salesman has developed a few tricks by himself, if only for survival as a salesman. Just as the Scientific American, which had endorsed the current president, had performed a study in July 2012 and had discovered that while many people may look like intelligent people, it's something a salesman will always tell you, they're actually not at all that difficult to fool. Just as easy as children, with just a little bit of magic and misdirection. As they found in one study, a magician threw a ball into the air a few times. On the third throw, However, he only pretended to throw it. Two-thirds of the participants reported seeing the ball vanish in midair, even though it had never left his hand. Their expectations were heightened to believe. The participants saw something amazing before their very eyes, something that never actually happened or existed at all. Could that happen to you? Could you be so easily fooled during times historically associated with confusion, fear, and despair? The odds are that you would be fooled, no matter how intelligent you believe you are, and probably more inclined to be fooled if you thought you were so smart. But do you believe in magic? Just like a gambler in Las Vegas knows that a winning gambler never relies simply upon dumb luck and may risk removal from a casino for counting cards. A true prestidigitator or stage illusionist knows that when he or she presents a deck of cards to perform a very simple or even complex card trick, in the eyes and the minds of the audience, primed to be prepared to be astounded and amazed on cue, they may have as many as 52 possible random chances. But perhaps you are the one who is actually far more savvy in the audience at a magic show. And you know that a magician may try to force a card. And there are a variety of ways, including what are called Svengali decks, to make this trick so simple that even a 5-year-old could do it. And perhaps even fool you. But did you know, according to the Scientific American, apparently even magicians have gone to Madison Avenue marketing specialists and conducted focus groups to better gauge the preferences of their audiences, just as political consulting firms now do for elections. And according to the Scientific American, which had unprecedentedly endorsed the current president, when people saw cards quickly presented one after another on a computer screen while they searched for a target card, their accuracy at selecting that card indicated the card's visibility. If you could see it more, you could find it more. If you couldn't see it, it would be invisible. Amazing how that works. Truly amazing. And this stage illusion was actually illustrated in the Hollywood film. Now you see it, now you don't. Where within a ruffled deck of cards, an exposure of just a fraction of a second more than the others produced in the movie audience a pre-selected random card for them to pick in their minds and believe it was their own choice. Amazing. If you are now astounded and amazed, did you know that the magicians know that the manner in which they phrase the invitation to pick a card, any card, may actually predetermine your choice? Would you prefer a Democrat ballot? Or that if you are the average and not exceptional American, when placed on the spot to pick a card, any card, you have a weighted and predetermined conditioned preference, almost culturally, for the Ace of Spades and the Queen of Hearts, the most popular cards, while other cards chosen frequently were 7s and 3s, consistent with other studies on how people choose a number, any number, between 1 and 10. You simply play the odds, and you win. People, at least according to Scientific American, are far more predictable than even Dr. Walensky, a doctor, says. And you look like an intelligent person. But even the most intelligent people may be fooled and played as a sucker under the proper conditions. And you, my friend, have a pandemic. You've seen the rest, but why not the best? He possesses over 15 years of experience as a legal assistant in major private law firms in D.C., New York, and Philadelphia, as well as in federal government practice. And as a childhood protege to a legendary civil rights and criminal defense attorney, he has gone to court as a pro se litigant on a variety of issues, including 3 cases brought during the current public health crisis, using the knowledge and experience he had acquired as a former biological warfare planner in defense of places of worship and religious liberties that, through over 2 years of motions in appellate practice, had been litigated all the way to the United States Supreme Court. You've seen the rest, but why not the best? After 2 years of pandemic crisis and emerging military contingencies in Eastern Europe, the times demand proven leadership and experience. But even Dr. Rochelle Walensky has said that over the past 2 years, human choices have not served Americans well. You've seen the rest. Why not the best? Major Mike Webb for U.S. Congress. Nobody else has the resume. And failure, this time, is not an option.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.